Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ag Innovation News Podcast, presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. I'm Dan Scogan, your host for the Ag Innovation News Podcast. Guests on this podcast will shed light on innovations in value-added agriculture, highlight important voices and work that's being done throughout the Minnesota ag sector, and educate the public about resources and organizations that support Minnesota agriculture. Today, we want to welcome to the Ag Innovation News Podcast, Mike Youngerberg, the Senior Director of Product Development and Commercialization for the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council, Mike Reiber, Founder and CEO of Axiom. Mike also helps companies identify market insights that accelerate business growth, and Harold Stanislawski, the AURI Director of Business and Industry Development. Today's discussion will focus around new uses for soybean meal, specifically around fertilizer blends for lawns and gardens. And Harold Stanislawski will be leading that discussion. So with that, Harold, welcome to the AURI Ag Innovation News Podcast.
Thank you so much. Another beautiful afternoon in Minnesota here, and we're so pleased to be talking about soybean meal fertilizers and what it can mean to the soybean industry. I want to start out by sharing a little bit of information as to how this project got started. We at AURI work very closely with the Minnesota Soy Research and Promotion Council and try to identify ways to add value to the crop that so many of the farmers raise, and that is soybeans. So in this case, we're going to be talking about soybean meal, which is a byproduct of the crush plants that produce oil. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Youngerberg first to explain a little bit about first the council itself and their work with Wisconsin, because Wisconsin has been involved in this also, and to kind of talk about the dilemma that has developed over the years here of increasing amounts of soybean meal and then the council's desire to find new markets. So Mike, thank you for coming to the podcast today and introduce yourself and address the issue.
Mike Youngerberg, Senior Director of Product Development and Commercialization for the Minnesota Soybean Program. As Harold said, our checkoff program is designed to invest for soybean farmers the dollars in development of new markets, whether they be use type markets, new export type markets, and to develop more profitability for the Minnesota soybean farmer. And one of the areas that Harold started to mention was as we looked at the changes that have happened in the renewable energy space, we've seen a lot more desire to move to renewable fuels, particularly the biodiesel. We've seen coming on renewable hydrocarbon diesel, and people are talking more about sustainable aviation fuel. So all these products are being processed using fats and oils. Soybean oil was the big major player in the biodiesel industry to get started with. But now we're bringing in more fats and oils besides soybean oil to drive that market. So one of the things that changed is, we had people crushing for more oil, wanting more oil for the marketplace. So our farmers saw early on that, okay, this was going to change the dynamic and create more soybean oil for the marketplace. So our farmers said, we need to find something else to do with the marketplace because aren't the traditional markets, because those are going to take up what they're going to take up, but looking at new areas. So that's really the whole reason behind the effort that we put together with AURI in this project.
Thank you, Mike. As this project got started, we contracted with a company called Axiom, and Mike Reiber is here who represents that company. And he first looked at this whole soybean meal fertilizer situation and conducted a survey and study. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike Reiber to talk about what we learned in the study, both in Minnesota and Wisconsin.
Good afternoon. We surveyed homeowners who had lawns, and we asked them about their experience with natural and organic lawn fertilizers. We also asked them about their concerns about the lawn fertilizers that they're applying. And last, how do they define safety of these fertilizers? So a couple of things that were really important. 90% of the 500 consumers are concerned about safety of lawn care fertilizers. 80% are concerned about the fertilizers running off into water sources, including rivers and lakes and groundwater. 75% of the people are interested in buying a safer alternative lawn care fertilizer that might be natural or that might be organic. The heuristic is that most homeowners think that natural and organic lawn care fertilizers are safer. They are, that's true. We ask them, what do they contain that makes these fertilizers safer than conventional lawn fertilizers that contain synthetic of plant nutrition? 51% said they contain plant-based ingredients like soybean meal. 50% said they contain ingredients that you could feed to animals, your dog or your horse. If something eats it, they don't have to worry about it being sick. 40% said that these natural organic fertilizers contain naturally occurring minerals. That news is quite positive for this soybean meal fertilizer initiative.
Mike, when you did the study, how big do you think the market for lawn and garden fertilizers are? And then how does that relate to this project that we had on soybean meal?
The biggest market for consumers is lawn fertilizer, and people will be fertilizing once or twice a year. 60% of them fertilize twice a year. So there's a very large market there. The challenge is that despite huge interest in these natural and organic fertilizers, people want to buy what works. And many of them have concerns about how quickly the fertilizers work. And that's one of the reasons why we have a 2408 blend that contains 25% soy, but it also contains urea, so we can get a fast green up. We have a 1608 fertilizer that is 50% soy meal, and that particular version could be AURI approved. AURI is the Organic Materials Retailing Institute that is very meaningful to people who like natural products. We have a 711 fertilizer that's for gardens and flowers, and it's very attractive because it contains 50% soy meal, as well as some other really good stuff that makes your vegetables grow quickly and your flowers look beautiful.
Mike, formulating the fertilizer is tricky business, you might say, to get everything right and meet all the regulations of the state and so forth, particularly as it relates to phosphorus. So we want to tell everyone that's listening to this podcast that the 1608, 2408 are phosphorus free and make excellent fertilizers for those who live around bodies of water or things like that. But formulating fertilizers both in Minnesota and Wisconsin, as we were working on this project, we've worked with a company that happened to have assets in both states that could actually manufacture these fertilizers. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because it's so important as we look at commercializing a product, and it's particularly attractive when you have manufacturing capabilities.
Like, processing soybeans, we have to have processing plants that are available for producers that are processing locally. Similarly, for our downstream customers, whether it be oil customers or meal customers, having processing close has always been a really big benefit. And it helps even in this situation where we can take a locally produced product and take it to another plant and have it formulated and available for customers to use.
Mike Reiber, when you worked with a company like FormaFeed from Stewart, Minnesota, that actually manufactured our product, you've got a history with them already. What do you see in terms of the formulation, the packaging, and the distribution of fertilizers like this?
Well, we see tremendous opportunity with rural or large metro rural homeowners who are interested in products that are more natural and that are safer for the environment, for children, for pets. A second thing, one of the reasons that we selected FormaFeed, which has two plants, one plant is in New Richmond, Wisconsin, and one plant is in Stewart, Minnesota. They are FDA approved feed grade facilities. So what that means is only things that animals can consume can go into those plants. And that's a real benefit when we're talking about safety of lawn care fertilizers. The plants are located within 50 minutes of Minneapolis, the Stewart plant is. The New Richmond plant is very close to distribution centers that supply Madison, Green Bay, and Milwaukee. So the distribution process will be really efficient and we'll be able to ship these fertilizers on demand.
Mr. Reiber, can you explain how we came up with a 50% soybean meal blend? How come we didn't go 60, 70? I'm sure Mike Youngerberg here with the Minnesota Soy Council would have liked a 100% soybean meal blend. Why did we blend at 50%?
We blended at 50% because we took an existing formulation that we developed for the golf industry. I gave our formulator the directive, put as much soybean meal in it as you can. The as much as you can, it was 50%. And we felt pretty good about that because I didn't think he was going to get 50% into that. The formulation, it has 7 different sources of protein. And so we were able to change the sources of protein to maximize the soybean meal content.
I want to say here that this product, for those who are listening to this podcast, it spreads just like any other fertilizer you would buy at a discount store. So you simply bring it home, you follow the directions on the bag, and you can put it in your spreader and spread it out and just wait until Mother Nature brings some rain and all the rest of the things that happen with fertilizers, and you're off to the races.
Can I interrupt for just a second and remind our listeners that you're listening to the Ag Innovation News podcast presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. And today we're having an in-depth discussion about the soybean meal fertilizer that has been developed. And our guests today are Mike Youngerberg, Mike Reiber, and Harold Stanislawski. Thank you, Harold, and let's get back to you as you continue that conversation.
Thanks, Dan. I want to discuss a little bit of the demonstrations that we conducted over the last 2 years in Minnesota with the help of the Minnesota Soy Research and Promotion Council checkoff, which is extremely valuable in order to make these projects happen. We wanted to get it into the hands of users who could give us meaningful feedback. So we approached 3 institutes of higher education. One was Ridgewater College in Wilmer, and the Fergus Falls Community College that is part of the M-State system and the Minskew system in Minnesota. And then also Northland Community College up in Thief River Falls in Northwest Minnesota. So we worked with their grounds people that handle all the grounds at these institutes of higher education. And we applied the fertilizer in the first year, which was 2 years ago. And if you remember, folks, it was extremely dry. I mean, it was so dry in the Wilmer area and Fergus area that we didn't get a lot of meaningful results because of the dry weather. However, up in Thief River Falls, up in northwestern Minnesota, the rainfall was adequate. It takes rain to activate any fertilizer. So it worked out really well up there, and we got our first indication that soybean meal fertilizers do perform, and so on and so forth. The second year, which is this year, everyone knows we've got ample rainfall pretty much everywhere in the state of Minnesota this year. So we had trials up in Hutchinson, Minnesota, Morris, Thief River Falls, and Fergus Falls. And we can tell you that the fertilizers performed really, really well. And this year we tested the 2408 product, which is 25% soybean meal, and it really performed well. And I just want to give Mike Youngerberg an opportunity to comment on this because we took some product up to the city of Hutchinson, who's a longtime soybean partner of ours, to test these things. And Mike, what were your observations up in Hutchinson?
When we got up there and an opportunity to see it, the person who has been in charge of the maintenance up there, John Olson, who's really been a soy bio-based product user, diligent user, I think was amazed at how quickly the soybean meal-based fertilizer on the application where they put it on out there greened up like right away. So when you can impress the city manager who is scrutinizing of everything that he has to buy and use, I think was a very good testament to how the product's going to work for everybody else.
Mike, from your perspective, as you work with the council, what would be your definition of success with this type of a program?
We have various projects that we work on. Some are longer term, some are shorter term. I think this one happens to be happily one of those shorter term to develop, and to develop the products. And as we look forward on developing newer products, offshoots of this, the next challenge will be how are we moving it into the marketplace and how do we get that done? And that's our next step. So we're taking it step by step, whatever it's going to take to make sure that we do the right job and do it right.
Well, thanks, Mike. And establishing the value chain for fertilizers like this is part of product development. I'm going to ask Mike Reiber here, has a company who does produce fertilizers and is familiar with how this happens, to give his insight as to how the value chain works, and then also comment on the price competitiveness of a product like this that has soybean meal in it.
Let's start with the price competitive aspect. As you all know, when you go to look at the cost of lawn care fertilizers, even the private label ones, the costs have been going up. They've gone up an awful lot since the Ukrainian war started, because Ukraine and Russia provides a lot of the urea and the synthetic nitrogen that goes into these lawn care fertilizers. I mentioned that we have a 2408 blend that contains 25% soybean meal. It also contains urea. And because of that, we can cover conservatively 17 to 18,000 square feet with a 50-pound bag of it.
Mike, can I stop you there just for our listeners? When we say 2408, what is meant by 2408?
24% nitrogen, 0% phosphorus, 8% potassium.
Thank you. Continue.
With the urea product, we are very price competitive with the premium labels and even some of the private labels, that fertilizers that you would buy. We're a heck of a lot safer. We feel good about that. And we feel good about the performance of these fertilizers in our demo tests, and also in some of the university testing that we've done with similar blends of fertilizers. Let's talk about the value chain. We believe that there are tremendous opportunities in a couple of markets. The first market is for homeowners or public grounds that are situated around lakes and water sources. Why is that? Well, the soybean meal and the other ingredients in our fertilizers are all slow release, with the exception of urea. And what that means is that they are less likely to run off into surface water and less likely to leach into groundwater than synthetic fertilizer forms. The second area of opportunity that we are very interested in is, and we saw this with the city of Hutchinson, residents and homeowners are highly concerned about what's going on onto the ground, the public grounds around them in their neighborhoods, onto the sports fields that they and their children play on. And we have a safer alternative. The third area of opportunity that we see is large garden centers that have contingents of customers who want to put natural products on their lawns and on their gardens. Interestingly, the number one source that the 500 people said in the survey that we did for information source for natural products is garden centers, independent garden centers. So we think we have an interesting value chain and a channel of distribution that could welcome a product like these.
So, Mr. Youngerberg, talking about the value chain, and to the listeners out there who's saying, boy, this sounds interesting. I'd really like to get a hold of some of this and put it in my lawn. And while we did our demonstrations on this particular pilot project, I think the listeners might be eager to say, how long can we expect before we can go to a garden center or a retailer and buy a Minnesota grown product by Minnesota farmers and apply it to our lawns?
The short answer is as quick as we can get there. The first phase is done. Now is where we really step into how do we build a marketing plan? Who do we build a marketing plan with? I think we've got some great opportunities for some partners to help us bring this product to the marketplace. So we need to make sure that we have our base products ready to go. As you said earlier, we've got capabilities to manufacture the product. It's just getting all of those last ducks in a row to say, okay, this is what it's going to take, and here's who we're going to help us bring this to the marketplace for the consumer.
Well, thank you, Mike, and to the listeners out there. I guess we'll say it's a work in progress at this point, but it's got a map or a way of getting into the marketplace that is being explored and will be implemented here in the next year or so. I want to just change topics just a little bit. We're talking about dry flowable fertilizers here for the lawn and garden market, but there also is the opportunity to make liquid soy fertilizers as well. And I'm going to ask Mr. Reiber to comment on this because liquid fertilizers have a tremendous play in indoor agriculture and in many other settings where the users of those fertilizers would prefer liquid over dry. Can you talk about that a little bit?
In controlled environment agriculture, where tomatoes and peppers and leafy greens are produced, in greenhouses where your bedding plants or your indoor plants are grown, the standard is liquid fertilizer. And Mr. Youngerberg challenged us to figure out how we could create quickly a liquid soy version of these granular fertilizers. And the answer is that there are two companies that we're speaking with that make liquid soy fertilizers that are made from soy protein isolates. So that means that they've taken the soy meal and they're refining it. And they're taking out the other things that aren't needed. And then they have a powder that goes into solution quite easily. And both of these companies have been around for a long time. And they have high nitrogen versions for liquid fertilizers that are quite interesting. So what we'll be doing is understanding these companies' experiences in controlled environment agriculture and greenhouses, and even in mainline agriculture, because there are some very interesting opportunities with side dressing seed plantings in the field safely without burning that seedling. So we will be reporting more to you on that in the coming months as we finalize those partnerships and look at the opportunities.
Well, thank you, Mike. One other follow-up question for you is working on this project was quite interesting because we went to the Northern Green Expo here in the Twin Cities, which is a rather large horticultural show that's put on here every spring. You just came back from a big conference in Ohio called Cultivate. This is where some of the biggest and leading companies in fertilizers come to look at products and so forth. Can you talk a little bit about this industry, some importance of big expos and shows like that?
Every year in Columbus, the second week of July starts on Sunday and goes till Tuesday. Companies from all over the world gather in Columbus, Ohio. And when I say from all over the world, it is truly, there are companies from Europe, there are companies from South Africa, there are companies from Central America, and they're there to share the latest development for indoor agriculture. What did I see this year that was really interesting? I saw an increased interest in having natural alternatives for the synthetic fertilizers that are being applied. Why do the growers want to have this? Well, they want to have this because they want to make marketing claims about natural and organic plants that they grow. Secondly, they want to have support sustainability claims that they have, whether it relates to carbon offsets, relates to chemical runoff from their farms, etc. Third, why do they want to have it? They know that good soil science produces good plants, and good plants that yield lots of flowers or yield lots of fruits and vegetables for both indoor agricultural growers or even the homeowners who buy those plants. And the soybean meal has always been a very, very important soil amendment. It contains amino acids, it contains carbon, it contains 7% natural nitrogen. And all of these things produce healthy soil that will produce more fruits and vegetables and more beautiful flowers.
Thanks, Mike. Attending shows and hearing from potential customers of what they need was really quite intriguing last year when it was held right here in St. Paul, Minnesota. So that was interesting. To kind of sum this up a little bit, is fertilizer for lawn care a price-sensitive product?
Yes, it is a price-sensitive product.
Okay. Now to both Mikes here, when we say price-sensitive, define what that means And the second question is, can soybean meal fertilizers compete?
Everything always depends on what else is happening on in the marketplace. What are the other options that people have? I mean, farmers do the same thing. What are the options that I have? I'd like to do this, but I have other options that I can do. When you look at where the soybean meal-based fertilizers are going to play a role in the marketplace, I think there's this desire for, as Mike Reiber was talking about, the sustainability issues are hitting everybody, and people are taking it to heart, want to do their part. And if their part is buying soybean meal-based fertilizer versus something else, and it's relatively priced similarly, people will gravitate toward it.
Mr. Reiber?
What I would say is that we're not going after the price-sensitive people. We're going after the people who understand the value of a natural fertilizer or an organic fertilizer. And there's more of those people out there. In our study, 50% of the 500 homeowners that we surveyed continue to use, or have used natural and organic fertilizer. That number is way up from 10 years ago. Why are they using it? Well, they're concerned about safety, they're concerned about the environment, and they're concerned about being responsible. Of these consumers, half of the consumers said that they would pay 10 to 20% more for fertilizer that they thought was safe and that contained the same ingredients as is in their animal food, their pet food. And soybean meal, is a major component of pet food and livestock feeds.
Thanks, Mike. I want to ask Mike Youngerberg one more question. How many acres of soybeans do we grow in Minnesota?
This year, about 6.9 million acres.
6.9 million acres of soybean just grown in the state of Minnesota, not to mention all the neighbors we have around here. So you can imagine that there's a lot of meal out there. But I want to just say this as we kind of conclude, is that this crop called soybeans, this miracle crop called soybeans, can be used for food, can be used for fuel, and it appears it has a place in the fertilizer side as well. So that's really quite dynamic in my mind as to how versatile this particular crop is. And we're pleased at AURI to be collaborator with the Minnesota Soy Research and Promotion Council. We're pleased to be working with Axiom, and we are going to pursue this as far as the value chain. So hopefully down the road here, not too far away, if you're a customer out there and would like to try a 50% soybean meal fertilizer, we'll have it for you. So with that, Dan, I'd like to turn it back to you for any questions you might have, and want to thank AURI for the opportunity.
Thank you, Harold, and no additional questions from my end. I think you guys covered it very well. We've been visiting today with Mike Youngerberg, the Senior Director of Product Development and Commercialization for the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council, Mike Reiber, founder and CEO of Axiom, and Harold Stanislawski, the AURI Director of Business and Industry Development. I want to thank you, the listener, for joining us today and listening to the Ag Innovation News Podcast, presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. And I want to thank my podcast crew of one, Lisa Martinez, the AURI Communications Manager and the editor of this production. To learn more about AURI, go to auri.org.